Well, hi there. This is Caleb Jones. This is the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. Welcome from Guadalajara, Mexico. Why am I welcoming you? I guess you're not here, are you? You're not going to Guadalajara, are you? I'm in Guadalajara, Mexico. I've been here for about a week. I will be leaving in about a week. I am finalizing my permanent, I'm not sure if it's permanent, if it's considered permanent here, more permanent Mexican residency, solidifying my 6th residency. I now have 6 residencies in 6 different countries. Soon that will go down to 5 residencies because I'm gonna let my Panama residency lapse. I already talked about that on my YouTube channel. And really quick, speaking of residencies and things like that, I have another podcast called the Sovereign CEO Podcast where I talk about international lifestyle and business. And if that's of interest to you, you can go to calebjones.com/podcast, and I'm on all the usual podcast platforms. In this podcast, I'm gonna talk about doctors, specifically the medical industry, but specifically doctors, how doctors are trained. And this is not a knock on all doctors. And this is going to sound like a funny statement, but this is true. Some of my best and closest and some of my most long-term friends are doctors. Many of you, if you've gone to some of my live events or been in some of my coaching programs, you've met or talked to Dr. Philip Fowler, fantastic guy. You've talked to, or maybe you've talked to or met Dr. Andrew Wingy. Fantastic guy. These are doctors. I have several other friends who are doctors. One long-term friend of mine is a doctor. And so I'm not saying all doctors are like this. I'm speaking in generalities, and generally what I'm about to say is true, although it doesn't apply to all doctors. And frankly, if any one of these doctors who are my friends were sitting right next to me, they would agree with at least most of what I'm saying. And the reason I know that is because I've discussed these things with them and they've agreed with it. At least for the most part, maybe not 100%, but maybe 80%. And this goes back to when people freak out about, well, if you have sex with multiple people, you'll get an STD. And I've mentioned before how a lot of older virgins, men who are virgins post age 25 and they're still virgins, one of their biggest reasons they say they are still virgins because they're scared of getting an STD, right? You're getting it while wearing a condom? Yeah, because the condom might fall off and you might get an STD. You know, if my dick goes anywhere near her pussy for less than 1/10 of a second, I'll get an STD. They don't understand the 2% rule. They don't understand the extraordinarily low odds of actually getting an STD, especially when you have sex with someone just one time. Even if the STD is one of the scary ones like HIV, I have published several articles about the actual odds of you contracting an STD or things like that. But not just STDs, various other things. Like when they tell women, if you wear this kind of underwear, you'll get a yeast infection. You know, stuff like that. Or here's one of my favorite examples. This is one of many examples I could give you. I was seeing a doctor many years ago. This is more of a generalist practitioner, not a friend doctor, not a friend of mine, but just a doctor who I'm sure was very smart and very competent. And she was going through, are you on any medication? I said, no, but I am on TRT. And immediately her face just she looks up with this shocked look on her face. And she goes, you're at increased risk of stroke. You know that, right? Okay. By the way, I told her, you mean from increased RBC red blood cell count? Correct. That's why I donate blood, a pint of blood every month to keep my RBC count less than 50. And she goes, oh, okay. A little knowledge goes a long way. Anyway, I could go on and on and on about why people are so scared of certain things because of doctors. And let me explain how this works. And of course, I am not a doctor. I never went to med school, but I know a lot of doctors. I've spoken to a lot of doctors about this, both my friends and professionally I've spoken with doctors, and this is generally how this works. And doctors won't necessarily tell you this, although some will, but they'll kind of say this, you know, kind of around the lines a little bit, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. Doctors' job is to scare you. Okay, that's their job. Their job is to say, if you don't wear a condom, you'll get AIDS and die, because it could happen. Now, they won't tell you that it's a fraction of 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 1% if you live in the developed Western world and you're not gay. They won't tell you that, okay? They'll just say, you better wear a condom or else you'll die. And they view it as, whether right or wrong, they view it as their job. They're helping to save your life. They're helping to reduce STD and diseases throughout the population. That's their role. Matter of fact, I just saw an article. Matter of fact, it was the article that gave me the idea for the topic of this podcast. I saw a news report a little while back that said, oh, and it was from doctors. Oh my God, there's a 26% increase in syphilis. Oh my God, this is of great concern to doctors. Now, what they don't tell you are the percentage of typical heterosexual Westerners living in the developed world, the odds of you getting syphilis of all diseases, my God, because I'm quite an expert on the odds of certain STDs. I do a lot of research into the STD thing, as you might imagine. I've written books about this. And the odds of you contracting syphilis, there's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. So let's say, I don't know what the exact number is, don't quote me on this figure, but let's say it's, 5/100ths of 1%. So now it's 26% more. So now it's what, 6/100ths of a percent? Oh no, let's all be worried about this. And this is exactly how doctors think. Their job is to scare the fuck out of you, and you saw that in action during the pandemic, didn't you? Their job was to say, oh my God, this flu has a 1% death rate. Therefore, you better wear a mask and you better stay home and you better do this and you better social distance and you better wash your hands and you better da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, or else you'll die. Now, that sentence leaves out the aspect of it's a 1% death rate, and the vast majority of people who are in that 1% who are dying are people who are at or over the average age of life expectancy anyway, age 78, who are already very overweight and are already very sick. They don't throw that part in there because, again, their job is to what? Their job is to scare you. That's their job. A lot of doctors don't view this as a bad thing. They like, well, that's goddamn right. I'm here to scare people to keep them healthy. The problem is rationality and happiness as an individual. So if you listen to everything doctors say about you better not eat that, you'll get a fucking heart attack. You better not have sex, you'll die of AIDS. You better not cough, you'll kill grandpa. You better not do this because of this. You better not do that because of that. Your life will be threatened if you do this. You're going to be one of these basket cases, one of these basket case beta males, and there are a lot of you guys out there who are just terrified about everything. You've got your hand sanitizer and you're never having sex because you might get AIDS. And you're basically going to be an insane maniac because you're listening to doctors. Now, are doctors wrong? Well, let's examine that for a second. If I say you better wear a mask, let's say this was during the pandemic, you better wear a mask, you better do X, Y, and Z, and if you don't, you might die. Is that a false statement? Technically, no. There's a 1% chance, actually far less than 1%, if you're not old, and very fat and very sick already, so it's actually less than 1%. So it's technically true. So they're not wrong, they're just leaving out a lot of the story. I'll use a dating parallel for this. I used to run into this in my first marriage. My first wife, and maybe you've dated a woman who's done this, or maybe had an ex-wife who did this, or an ex-girlfriend who did this. My wife at the time would go to a third party, someone in her family, someone in my family, or one of her friends, and she would tell them about something bad that I did that made me look really shitty. And it was 100% true. It wasn't a lie. She didn't lie. The problem is she left out the first 2/3 of the story of what she did and the problems that she caused and why my reaction was this. So she didn't put it into context. That's what context means. So when a doctor says, you better wear a condom or you might die of AIDS, it's not false, but it is a statement without context. Let me give you the context to that statement. If you are a heterosexual man living in the developed world, you will have to have repeated sex, vaginal sex, without a condom hundreds of times in a given year to have the actual risk factor to actually get AIDS. And that is a true factual statement. If you don't believe me, feel free to Google it and look it up for yourself. Now there's the context, and I talk about what? The 2% rule. If something has a lower of a 2% chance of occurring, you ignore it and move forward. If it has more than a 2% chance, then you have to modify your behavior and or take precautions. So if the odds of you getting AIDS was 10%, this would be a very different conversation. I would be like, holy shit, you better be super careful. However, that being said, what have I said for 15 years in my Alpha Male 2.0 Black Dragon content? Wear condoms. Yes, I wear condoms with new women, and you should too. Guys who never wear condoms are fucking dumb. But frankly, STDs is the least of your concerns in the Western world. Your bigger concern is, what if you get her pregnant? You get her pregnant, and now she owns your wallet for the next 18 years, and if you don't pay up, you go to prison, and that's a literal statement. And that isn't 2% rule, that'll happen. Anyway, I am not saying don't take precautions, I'm not saying don't be wise. Obviously, I do everything that I need to do. I wear a seatbelt when I get in the car. right? I watch my diet, 90% of the time. I get plenty of sleep. I take care of my health. I wear condoms when I have sex. I do the things doctors recommend. But I'm not this freakazoid maniac about, oh no, this doctor said this, so I better not do that. I've said this before, and I will say this example again. I have other examples I could give you about this. I've had a doctor tell me this AIDS thing, or not AIDS, STDs in general. I had a doctor tell me, now this was behind closed doors, and he basically said to me, and he said it in a very quiet voice because he's not allowed to say these things, he's not allowed to relay these kinds of facts. In terms of AIDS, he said, Caleb, you know what, honestly, and this was me several years ago in Portland, Oregon, to give you context. He said, Caleb, honestly, you could go have sex, unprotected sex, with 200 women right now in the Portland area. You could do it. Vaginal, unprotected sex with 200 women, and you're not gonna get AIDS. You're not gonna get AIDS. Now, you could get something else. You could get chlamydia. You could get herpes. Could get those. That's possible. But you're not going to get AIDS. You're just not. He goes, now, outside of this door, outside this room, I'm going to deny I ever said that. I'm not allowed to say those kind of things. I'm not allowed to give the facts because I'm a doctor. My job is to scare you with these fraction of a fraction of 1% horror stories. So he said, don't ever quote me on this. And if you ever do, I'm going to deny I ever said it. Okay, so just keep this between us. But technically, factually, statistically, that is correct. You're not going to get AIDS if you bang a bunch of chicks. You're not. He said it. I've had other doctors very quietly say things like this to me too. Caleb, this thing about you'll get this or you'll do that or you'll die for this, it's bullshit. You're not going to do it. The odds of this happening are so low, it's just ridiculous. Something else about doctors. Most doctors that you see are generalist practitioners. I think that's the term. They're generalists. They are not specialists. So if you go see your generalist family doctor because you hurt your arm, and then by the way, you ask him about your dick or sexual stuff, and he starts giving you all these horror stories about STDs, that's not his area of expertise. It's not. The woman who freaked out, the doctor who freaked out when I told her I was on TRT, she was what was she? She was a specialist. She was a dermatologist. I'm pretty sure that's right. Or was she a cardiologist? I don't remember, it's years ago. But she was a specialist, but she knew absolutely nothing about hormonal factors. She was not an endocrinologist. She didn't know anything about strokes. So she was quoting shit out of her ass that she read in some medical journal or something. She wasn't an expert in that area. So if you ever get these horror stories from doctors, one of the first questions out of your mouth should be, well, here's the first question out of your mouth. What are the statistical probabilities of that actually happening to me? If you have sex without a condom, you'll die of AIDS. What are the statistical probabilities of that actually happening to me? I'll give you another story regarding that question. I was with a doctor during the pandemic, okay? This was a plastic surgeon, okay? And he was a doctor, he was an MD, okay? But he was a plastic surgeon. And I was wearing a bandana around my neck. I was gonna put it up. This was when you had to wear a mask and everything. And he loses his mind. That bandana is not going to protect you against anything. You're going to get, I'm not going to say the word, you're going to get cerveza sickness. You're going to get cerveza sickness and you're at risk. You're at a risk factor, Caleb, because you're overweight. So, oh my God, you need to wear an N95 mask and I said, what? And he really got pissed when I told him I was about to go on a flight. I was about to go on an international flight. He's like, oh my God, you're going to get cerveza sickness because you're wearing a bandana. It'll just go right through the bandana. And he's freaking the fuck out, okay? Because his job is to what? Scare me. And I said, what is the statistical probability I'm A, going to get cerveza sickness, and B, have anything worse than a flu for 5 or 6 days in terms of symptoms? What is the statistical probability of that actually occurring where I'm going to have worse symptoms than a flu at my age, he knew how healthy I was. Yes, I'm overweight. At my age, all these other factors, what is the statistical probabilities? And he wouldn't answer the question. He's like, right. He wouldn't answer the fucking question because he knew he was being a psycho doctor, trying to scare me and being silly without context. So, whenever a doctor tries to scare you, that's the question you ask. What is the statistical probability that's actually going to occur to me at my age, at my race, at my sexual preference? Because, like, for example, AIDS and syphilis, this 26% increase in syphilis, primarily, as I read the article, is mostly an issue with gay, non-white men. Okay, so I'm not gay and I'm white. So guess what? Not a big factor for me. Okay, now they're not allowed to say that. That's very politically incorrect. But again, What are the statistical probabilities that's going to occur to me based on me, my sexual preferences, my age, my race, the city in which I live? And make them give you a number. And if they can't give you a number, because they won't, that should tell you something. The second question you should ask is this your area of expertise as a physician? So the guy freaking out about their cerveza sickness was a plastic surgeon. The woman freaking out about a stroke from TRT was a dermatologist. Okay, ask them the family doctor who says you're going to die if you don't have sex, and is he an STD specialist? Right? There's a word for it. I don't know what the word is. Ask them that question. Is this your area of expertise? Because I promise you, because I've had this experience, when you actually go ask someone and that's their area of expertise, all of a sudden the horror stories aren't there anymore. They don't give you the horror stories so much. A little bit. They're much better because they actually have all the context, which all the other doctors will not give you when they're trying to scare you. So that's it. Just be aware whenever you see a doctor, their job is to scare you by removing context and giving you horror stories that are within the 2% rule. That's the bottom line for all this. And don't be afraid to fight back and ask questions of your doctor who's trying to scare you and put him in his place. And by the way, let me end with this. If he actually does give you real stats, okay, if he really does give you real statistics of your personal odds of having this problem and they're over 2%, like, hey, if you keep eating McDonald's every week, you're going to get cancer in 10 years, and that's well more than 2%, dumbass, then yes, listen to him. I'm not saying don't listen to doctors. I'm not one of those guys. I love doctors. Doctors are great. Some of my favorite conversations I've ever had with doctors. So I'm not saying don't listen to doctors. I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. Take their advice if it's over 2%. If it's under 2%, or they don't give you a figure because they don't fucking know, then carry on. You'll be okay. I will see you in next week's podcast. Have fun. Bye.